Ladies and gentlemen, please help me honor Senate Leader Mitch McConnell.
First, I want to thank Joe Arnold. Joe, you did a lot of work in putting that together. And I must say, I like the way I looked in the early years better than the way I look now. But it does underscore the trajectory of my career. And when I first got there, I was 99th in seniority, and I was the last person in seniority on the Republican side. Seniority is not everything. For example, you don't get to be the leader because of seniority, but it does count for a lot of things, including the location of your desk on the Senate floor. So as you can imagine, I had the very last desk over in the corner where the light's not very good. If you ever watch us on C-SPAN 2, you'll notice that we don't usually sit at our desks. We're usually milling around, talking and all the rest. But every once in a while, there are these sort of solemn occasions where you sit where you're supposed to. Well, the first time that happened to me in my Senate career, there I was over in the corner where the very last seat where the light's not very good. I remember looking around the room and thinking to myself, none of these people are ever going to die. Retire, or be defeated. But alas, I noticed when I was sitting in that seat that the best seat was the one Bob Dole had. And I thought to myself, maybe, just maybe, in the midst of all these ambitious people, someday I might get the best seat. And so that was, many senators look in the mirror every morning to see a president. I was not that bold. I thought, maybe I had a skill set that could lead me to the best seat at some point. There were challenges along the way, as you can imagine. When I was elected to the Senate in 1984, interestingly enough, almost exactly the same margin that Attorney General Beshear beat Governor Bevin by the other day, about 5,000 votes. My side had not elected a statewide official in 16 years, so it had been a long dry spell. And it was an unusual election in 1984. For Ronald Reagan, it was morning again in America. Everybody was in a good mood. Can you imagine that? Everybody in our country now is mad about something. We're all acting out, But everybody was in a great mood. And nobody wanted to fire anybody. And I was running against the incumbent. It didn't make any difference which party it was. Nobody was interested in firing anybody. Everybody thought it was heaven on earth, morning again in America. By some miracle, I managed to eke out a victory, and so the feeling in Washington was that if Mitch McConnell's winning, we must be on the way to a big night, because they were certainly not expecting that. They waited all night, and there weren't any other victories. And so I went to Washington as the only Republican challenger in the country who defeated a Democratic incumbent. And all of a sudden, I'd gone from total obscurity to being kind of hauled out around town as an example of coming from behind and winning against the odds and all of that. And so I was at a dinner party one night, and actually wasn't a party, it was one of these big dinners where there were waiters. And at one point, the waiter came by and I said, "Could I have another pat of butter for my baked potato?" And the waiter kind of ignored me. So I said again, "Could I have another pat of butter for my baked potato?" And maybe you don't know who I am, I said. I'm that guy that won the big upset victory in Kentucky. The waiter looked at me and he said, "Well, Senator, I didn't know who you were, but maybe you don't know who I am." I said, "I don't. Who are you?" He said, "I'm the guy in charge of the butter." That didn't really happen. That didn't really happen. But, we send 535 people to Washington. Everybody has a vote, but everybody's not equal. And we're all competing with each other to try to see how far we can advance, because this is a bunch of ambitious people. These are all a bunch of class president types, who have sharp elbows and big egos, and they're pretty good at politics, or they wouldn't have made it that far in the first place. And so there is a kind of, it's collegial, but it's also competitive. And like any person who goes into this kind of work, you want to do the best you can, not just for your own personal advancement, but to help the people that sent you there. So as improbable as my becoming the longest serving senator in Kentucky history and becoming the longest serving Republican Senate leader is, how improbable do you think it would be for somebody who went to Manual High School, the biggest high school in the biggest city in Kentucky, to be the rural Kentuckian of the year? Never would have predicted that. But, our state is one of really not that many states left that's about 50-50 rural-urban. And that's not the way it is in Congress. The House is overwhelmingly oriented toward population for obvious reasons. The Senate, you get 2 senators from every state, no matter how small you are. States like North Dakota and South Dakota and Wyoming have 1 congressman and 2 senators. So the Senate is the place where it's hard to ignore rural and small town America. It's the place to kind of even it out. And as you look at the leadership of Congress, that I think was alluded to in Joe's film, there are 4 leaders in Congress. The other 3 are from New York and California. So I feel like I have a kind of special responsibility to look out for Middle America. And also in particular, I have a favorite state in Middle America. So there are some advantages to having somebody in the position that I'm in. That happened to our state one other time. Alvin Barkley was the leader of the majority and the Democratic Party for about 10 years during the Roosevelt time. I benefited Kentucky in a variety of ways. One good example alluded to in the film was the tobacco program. It came in when Barkley was leader, and he crafted it. And we all know for many, many years it was incredibly important to this state. When I went to the Senate in 1984, we grew at least some of it, in 119 of 120 counties. It was the only thing you could do legally on a half-acre up a holler and still make money off of it. And to show you how pervasive it was, the UK Agriculture Survey in 1997 said we had 46,000 tobacco producers actually growing it. And we had more quotas than that, but if you recall, people would rent out their quotas. 46,000 active tobacco growers. But clearly, things were changing because of all the public health concerns. And I advocated a tobacco buyout. Before, it was sort of signed off on by everybody, and I can remember the Farm Bureau's initial reaction was, "Oh my God, that's not a good idea." And it was greeted with a good deal of controversy. Jim Bunning was running against Scotty Basler for the Senate that year, and I told Jim, I said, "You need to be against what I'm for here, because it looks like this is not the best place for you to be politically. So that's how it started off. Well, I had a smile on my face a couple of years later when they came to me and said, you know, maybe that wasn't such a bad idea after all. And so then the question was, how can you pull off something that will be described this way? You mean you're asking me to have the federal government pay somebody to quit growing tobacco? Really? Talk about a hard sell. This is not easy to pull off. So this was the first example of something major that being in a key position allowed me to deliver for our state. At that point, I was the number 2 in my party. I was the whip, number 2. And I spoke to the majority leader, Bill Frist from Tennessee, and I said, I need to be on the conference committee on an international tax bill. He said, what? I said, I need to be on a conference committee on an international tax bill. And he said, okay, yeah. The reason I needed to be on there is because I couldn't get a tobacco buyout across the Senate floor. But over on the House side, in that particular bill, there was sentiment for a tobacco buyout. So to shorten the story just a bit, we airdropped the tobacco buyout into that bill. It never went across the floor of the Senate. The bill passed and got signed by the president and provided compensation for the asset that the government had created itself back in the 30s. The government created the asset that went onto your farm upon which you were taxed. It was part of the value of your farm. And so the argument was you were owed compensation for the asset the government created in the first place. But when it's described as, you mean you want me to pay somebody to quit growing tobacco? That's my definition of a hard sell. So as a result of being in a leadership position like I was able to circumvent that and pull that off. The question then became, what's next? The tobacco buyout ran from 2004 to 2014. And there was a growing sentiment that we ought to try industrial hemp. And it really made no sense for it to be under the Controlled Substances Act, which it had been for about 40 or 50 years. So, you saw the chairman of the Agriculture Committee in the film. I said, hey, Pat, I think I'd like for you to put into the original bill, the way it works in these committees on a big bill like that, it has to start somewhere. There has to be a bill to start with. It's typically called the chairman's mark. I said, hey, Pat, I'd like for you to put in the chairman's mark, the legalization of industrial hemp. He said, of course. And he did. And so we didn't vote on it in committee. We didn't vote on it on the floor. It wasn't in the House version. Then you have to have a conference to put the two bills together. So the Speaker of the House appoints conferees, and who do you think appoints the conferees in the Senate? Me. So who do you think I put on the conference? Me. So the House yielded to the Senate, and it was passed by the president and never voted on. Now, in this case, I think we probably could have gotten the votes for it, unlike the tobacco buyout. But I cite these couple of examples. I know this sounds a little bit like a campaign speech, but when you've been around as long as I have, one of two things is the case if you're running for an election. You've either been there too long or you're indispensable. I'm going to make the second argument. And so these are examples of how Kentucky is gets to punch above its weight, if you will, by having someone from our state in a position like this. And so we are now in the second Farm Bill, as of 2018, full legalization of industrial hemp. There will be some casualties along the way, like any new business. The pioneers are out on the cutting edge of going forward. Some won't make it, but this is going to be good for our state. It'll settle down, both the banking issues that are connected with it and some FDA issues that are connected with it, but it'll settle down and provide, I don't know if it'll ever be as big as tobacco or not, but another new thing for us to try. So I cite a couple of examples there is probably why you all decided to honor me like this morning, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. It's humbling, and I'm deeply grateful for the opportunity to have done something that I not only personally enjoy, but find fulfilling. And I still do, in spite of what I want to touch on here for a minute, which is what I think America's biggest problem is right now, is a lack of civility. A lack of civility. We have a behavioral problem. And people are acting out. And it's not, I don't think, limited to one ideological place or another. You've just got a lot of people engaging in bad behavior. One of the things I'm proudest of in my career, unrelated to Kentucky, was the decision I made not to fill the Supreme Court when Justice Scalia passed away in 2016. And the president, I think, made an outstanding appointment in Justice Gorsuch, and he's got a book out, and I was watching a show one night in which it was basically a profile of him and his book. And he said he thought America had a civility problem, and I said to myself, you're absolutely right. America has a civility problem. We need to learn how to behave better, how to be able to disagree without anger. You read stories of young people incentivized, I think, by the faculty actually on college campuses who don't want to hear anything they may disagree with. It might upset them to be exposed to a point of view that they don't already subscribe to, being brilliant, of course, and knowing everything at 18. I think that's troublesome. I'm not down on America. I'm upbeat on our future. But this is a problem that we all need to work on. Because civility is an important thing in a democracy. You have to be able to have a debate. We learned that early on in this country. You think we have problems now. We didn't have anything like the problems they had before the Civil War, ultimately leading to the Civil War and the kinds of debates that they had then. So we've had these tense times throughout the history of our country, but we made it through them by, in the end, being willing to listen to other points of view and working out our differences. And I can tell you that, we've got 535 people that come to Congress, and boy, they are different, really different, depending upon where they're from, what their philosophical allegiance is. But I think this is something we all need to be thinking about once again, how to have a respectful debate in this wonderful country of ours without throwing things and getting angry and acting out. So that's, I think, our biggest national problem. And I intend, for what little impact I can have on that, not to act that way. I mean, we have plenty of incentive to get angry, but as you may have noticed, I try to stay calm, be respectful, and don't get caught up in these intense debates that we have. The campaigns, of course, are always, always, shall I say, hot salsa, but the governing part doesn't need to be that way. And I can assure you in the Senate is not that way. And we've got everybody from Ted Cruz to Bernie Sanders. But it is a place where collegiality is still alive, where no one hates anybody, and where we try to get along. Let me conclude by saying I'm going to continue to take advantage of the position my colleagues have elected me to advantage this state for as long as I can, and give us every single advantage we possibly could have, to give us the opportunity on a daily basis to punch above our weight and to help lead America. Thank you so much for this honor this morning. I deeply appreciate it.